They were the standard bearers, the elite, the four horsemen. Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Ole Anderson, and Tully Blanchard. They were a brotherhood that ruled the world of wrestling. But what happens when a brother falls? For one of them, the family door wasn't just closed, it was slammed shut, locked, and he was left out in the cold. This is the story of how one of the founding fathers of wrestling's greatest faction was erased from the legacy he helped build, and why, for the longest time, it seemed like they never truly forgave him. To really get the magnitude of the fall, you first have to appreciate the height from which he fell. Long before the four fingers were ever raised in unison, Tully Blanchard was already a decorated and despised champion. As a second-generation star, wrestling was in his blood. When he walked into Jim Crockett Promotions in the mid-1980s, he wasn't some rookie looking for a spot. He was a proven commodity, a former NWA National Heavyweight Champion who carried himself with an unmatched arrogance. He was a master of the cheap shot and a technical wizard who would much rather cheat to win than do it honorably. Then, in 1985, the wrestling landscape changed forever. An impromptu alliance to save Ric Flair from a beatdown brought four distinct, dangerous individuals together. There was Ric Flair, the diamond-encrusted, jet-flying, kiss-stealing World Heavyweight Champion. There was Ole Anderson, the grizzled, no-nonsense veteran. There was the enforcer Arn Anderson, the group's brutal backbone. And then there was Tully Blanchard. If Flair was the frontman and Arn was the enforcer, Tully was the nasty, underhanded engine that made the whole thing run. Flair had a cool factor that made some fans secretly admire him. Arn had a workmanlike grit that earned respect. Tully, however, was pure, uncut villainy. He made sure there was no gray area. The four horsemen were the bad guys. The original lineup was undeniable, a fact Ole Anderson himself would later affirm with his signature bluntness, including their essential manager J.J. Dillon as part of the core group. With Dillon orchestrating their reign of terror, they dominated the National Wrestling Alliance. They didn't just win matches, they systematically dismantled their opponents. Their most famous feud was against the American Dream Dusty Rhodes, a war that saw them break Dusty's ankle inside a steel cage, an act of pure villainy that cemented their status. Tully was at the center of it all. He held the NWA World Television Championship and the prestigious United States Heavyweight Championship. His feud with Magnum TA over that US title became the stuff of legend, culminating in a brutal and bloody I Quit match inside a steel cage at Starrcade 1985. It was a match so violent it's still talked about in reverent tones today. Blanchard's role wasn't just as a singles star. He and Arn Anderson formed a tag team that was as smooth as silk and tough as nails. They were a perfect duo, capturing the NWA World Tag Team Championships twice. For a time, the group was untouchable. They were a unit, a brotherhood. But in the high-stakes world of professional wrestling, loyalty is often a currency with a fluctuating value. And behind the designer suits and championship belts, the seeds of dissent were already being sown. By 1988, the four horsemen weren't just on top of the mountain, they were the mountain. In a moment of supreme dominance, the faction held every major championship in the promotion. Ric Flair was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Barry Windham, who had replaced Ole Anderson, was the United States Heavyweight Champion, and Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard were the World Tag Team Champions. They weren't just part of the show, they were the show. They embodied the Horseman lifestyle, a whirlwind of private jets, limousines, custom suits, and beautiful women. They were the pinnacle of success, and they made sure everyone knew it. Their promos were legendary, a symphony of arrogance that fans hated, which translated into sold-out arenas everywhere they went. The chemistry between Arn and Tully, in particular, was special. They were more than partners. They were the Brainbusters, a tag team so cohesive they seemed to share one mind in the ring. Their matches are still considered masterclasses in tag team psychology, But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Jim Crockett Promotions, despite its popularity, was financially unstable. As the company was being sold to Ted Turner to become World Championship Wrestling, WCW, lucrative guaranteed contracts were offered to top stars. Yet, two of the company's cornerstones, the World Tag Team Champions Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, were left out. Feeling disrespected and undervalued, they made a decision. As Tully later explained, "They didn't give Arn and I a contract with guaranteed money, and that was like a slap in the face when they were giving big money to other people that we were making stars out of." They dropped the NWA tag titles and looked north to Vince McMahon's World Wrestling Federation. It was a business decision from two men who knew their worth. But it was a decision that would set in motion a chain of events far more catastrophic than either could have imagined. The jump to the WWF wasn't the mistake that cost Tully everything. The real mistake was yet to come. In late 1988, Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard arrived in the WWF. Now called the Brainbusters and managed by the legendary Bobby the Brain Heenan, they were an immediate threat. Their gritty NWA style was a stark contrast to the WWF's more character-driven landscape, and for a time, it worked perfectly. Their talent was undeniable. In July 1989, they did what few thought possible. They defeated Demolition to become the WWF World Tag Team Champions, ending the champions' record-setting 478-day reign. It was a huge win that cemented their status as one of the best tag teams on the planet. However, their time at the top was short. They dropped the titles back to Demolition just a few months later in October 1989. But behind the scenes, a much bigger plan was in motion. Ric Flair, still in WCW, was orchestrating a grand reunion. He had negotiated a massive deal to bring his brothers Arn and Tully back home to reform the Four Horsemen. The money was life-changing. Tully himself confirmed the figures years later, stating a deal was in place for $750,000. They gave their notice to the WWF, set to finish up after the Survivor Series pay-per-view in November 1989. They were going home. And then, it all fell apart. Just days before they were set to leave, the WWF conducted a surprise drug test. In that era, testing wasn't as widespread or stringent as it is today. As Tully would later clarify, the company wasn't testing for steroids. "They were testing for cocaine," he stated flatly, "and that's what I flunked." The timing couldn't have been worse. It was a single, disastrous personal failure at the worst possible moment. He was immediately suspended by the WWF and would be unceremoniously replaced in his Survivor Series match by his manager, Bobby Heenan. The dream return to WCW, the massive contract, and the next chapter of his legacy, it all evaporated instantly. The positive test wasn't just a bump in the road, it was the end of the road. News traveled fast, and the new head of WCW, Jim Herd, had a decision to make. The fallout was swift and brutal. When word of the failed drug test reached WCW, Tully Blanchard's lucrative contract offer was pulled. Arn Anderson, who had done nothing wrong, was punished as well. Herd informed Arn that since the Brainbusters were no longer a package deal, his own offer was being slashed significantly. Arn was caught in an impossible position. He'd already burned his bridge with the WWF and had a family to support. He had no choice but to accept the reduced offer and return to WCW alone. Tully was left behind, out in the cold. In a revealing interview, Tully reflected on the situation with bewilderment. "I'm the only guy that ever flunked a drug test that never got hired back. Why was the punishment so severe?" It's believed the new, corporate-run WCW under Turner Broadcasting wanted no part of a public relations nightmare involving cocaine. Jim Herd, who often clashed with wrestling traditionalists, may have also used it as a chance to assert his authority. For Tully, the professional consequences were devastating. His mainstream wrestling career was, for all intents and purposes, over. The Four Horsemen did reform in WCW, but without him, trying to fill the void with names like Sting and Paul Roma. But it was never the same. The chemistry was gone. the personal consequences were just as severe. The bond with his partner, Arn Anderson, was shattered. For over 10 years, the two men barely spoke. Arn later admitted he didn't blame Tully for the failed test, but for how the situation was handled financially, it still drove a wedge between them that took a decade to remove. Forced out of the spotlight, Blanchard's life took a dramatic turn. He found religion and dedicated his life to a prison ministry. He has often said that this catastrophic failure was ultimately his salvation, stating, "Me flunking the drug test is what caused me to meet Christ and changed my life." It's a powerful story of personal redemption, but it doesn't change the professional reality. A founding father of the Four Horsemen had been effectively erased from his own history. For years, Tully Blanchard was the forgotten Horseman. While Ric Flair and Arn Anderson continued their legendary careers, Tully's name was often spoken only in what-if scenarios. He made a few appearances on the independent circuit and had a one-off match at WCW's Slamboree '94, but a full-time return to a major promotion never happened. He claimed a 1993 offer from WCW was too low, further cementing his exile. The blacklist, whether official or unspoken, felt very real. Slowly, the ice began to thaw. In 2012, Tully Blanchard was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame alongside his fellow Horsemen, Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, Barry Windham, and J.J. Dillon. It was a moment of reconciliation, a public acknowledgement of his essential role in the group's history, but it couldn't erase the years spent on the outside looking in. More recently, his career saw an unexpected resurgence in All Elite Wrestling, where he managed several acts starting in 2019. Yet, this comeback also ended quietly. By early 2023, Blanchard confirmed he was no longer with AEW or ROH, saying his departure was a little more complex than his contract simply expiring. He now considers his on-screen career to be over. The story of Tully Blanchard is one of brilliance, arrogance, and heavy consequence. It's a cautionary tale about how one mistake can derail a legendary career in the cutthroat world of professional wrestling. The Four Horsemen were never quite the same without his sneering charisma and vicious in-ring intelligence. And in a final, ironic twist to their shared history, it is his former partner, Arn Anderson, who now legally owns the Four Horsemen trademark. Tully Blanchard's exile, born from a single catastrophic decision, raises a powerful question. In a business filled with second and third chances, why was his road back so long and difficult? Was it a grudge, a corporate decision, or just bad timing that created a wound too deep to heal? Whatever the reason, it turned one of the four originals into the man they never truly forgave, forever altering the history of the sport he helped define.